Last week, the City of Detroit Lakes, with the Detroit Lakes Community Development Committee, actually held a meeting in which they invited many people throughout the lakes area, from lake associations to watershed districts to DNR officials and elected officials, local and state, pretty much anybody that was interested in our lakes, to come to a meeting to really get a presentation on an update on what's gone on so far in the battle against aquatic invasive species in the last couple of years in the lakes area, and to get ideas and suggestions from the community on how they should proceed in the future. It was one of those meetings with 100+ people there in standing room only. Was pretty much preaching to the choir. Most people there were pretty aware of what's been going on the last couple of years and were very interested in making sure we're all coordinated and on the same page. I learned a lot actually at that meeting, and I wanted to talk about a couple of these things that I learned while I was there. Number one, it was a pretty good consensus among the groups that this year's aquatic invasive species enforcement was very weak to really not working. And a big part of that was because there were just not enough volunteers for the number of accesses and boats we have here in the lakes area. Like any volunteer organization, sometimes you have a small group of very committed people and they could be easily burned out or get to the point where they're not even allowed to have their own lives. And that's just no good for anyone. So that was an issue a lot of them had. Another one was getting training these volunteers. They have to be certified and trained by the DNR. Often they needed 15 in order to have a class, and it was tough for them to get 15 people on one night or one day or whenever this class was supposed to be taught to get registered. So not having enough volunteers really made it tough to have that AIS enforcement here in the lakes area. Another thing I learned is citations are going up. The DNR every year has issued more and more citations. Whether or not the dollar amount is proper is one thing. I have advocated much higher, personally myself, much higher fees for violations of aquatic invasive species laws. Also, the lake associations around here have been spending a lot more money than I even knew or anticipated, both the lake associations and the Pelican River Watershed District. Together, they've spent over $400,000 this year alone researching and treating the lakes for flowering rush, especially Big Detroit Lake. The DNR has contributed about $68,000 in the form of grants. So locally, we're continuing to really take on this burden. And if you combine those numbers together, it's close to $500,000. I learned that we have 23 decontamination units in the state of Minnesota. That is an unacceptable number in the land of 10,000 lakes. We definitely need more of those. I also learned that Zequinox, this chemical that they made a big deal about a few weeks ago, being tested on Alexandria Lake, near there, Lake Carlos, I believe, is not going to be a silver bullet. It's really going to be used for treating things like Rose Lake and so forth. So we need something better than that, even though some people thought it could be. But what I learned that upset me the most is the DNR did a study that said, well, what could we do to put a decontamination unit on each lake infested with aquatic invasive species? The price tag for that was around $6 to $8 million. To me, that is peanuts, and a lot of people in the meeting felt the same way. The state of Minnesota figured out $975 million to build a stadium, yet you're telling me we can't find $6 to $8 million to protect the lakes already infested? I fear maybe the battle against aquatic invasive species is going to be difficult. Some officials believe all we can do is hope to contain the spread of aquatic invasive species until we can find a cure. And maybe that's the case, but decontamination units at lakes would definitely help that are infested. $6 to $8 million to me as a chip in the bucket. There's over $400 million biannually in the Lessard funds and that heritage tax that we all approved. The money needs to come from there, and we need to find it now.